All right, we got some more A&P Madness here with Dr. H. Today we are in this video. I've done a lot today, but in this video we are going to be talking about the extrinsic controls of blood pressure with a focus on hypotension. Hypotension, of course, is going to be related to an decrease in the mean arterial blood pressure. And as I have tried to do in all of my videos, I think one of the very first things that all you students out there, all you people that are trying to learn out there should do is first and foremost write down the equation for mean arterial blood pressure. And if you do this every time, well, redundancy is the key to learning. And I got this nice silvery marker this time where MAP is proportional to cardiac output times TPR times blood volume. You guys have seen this at this point, hopefully multiple times, enough times that this should be starting to become an instinct. If it is not becoming an instinct by now, well, make it an instinct, as I always say. Just keep doing it until it becomes an instinct. Why is this so important? Because we know three variables control mean arterial blood pressure. There are three variables: cardiac output, total peripheral resistance, and blood volume. If cardiac output goes up, what do we know is going to happen to mean arterial blood pressure right off the bat? So now this heart starts pumping harder or faster, whatever the case may be. This patient's blood pressure just shot through the roof. Well, what is their body going to try to do? It's got to compensate for that. That's what physiology is all about, right? So as cardiac output shoots up, the body's blood pressure is going to increase, and then it's going to try to bring this back down. But what other variables do we have to bring down to try to regulate mean arterial blood pressure? Well, we can try to bring down TPR, and we can try to bring down blood volume, right? So that's how we use this equation to understand physiology. Let's go ahead and erase those. What if we had a situation like atherosclerosis where a patient's total peripheral resistance starts to go up? And if their total peripheral resistance starts to go up, I started almost using green there. If their TPR starts to go up, what do we know happens to their mean arterial blood pressure? It goes up, right? And if their mean arterial blood pressure goes up, what's the body gonna try to do? Bring it back down. What variables can fix that? Cardiac output can go down, blood volume can go down. These are the ways the body are going to try to fix it. Now, it's much more complicated than this. It always doesn't work like this, but it's at least an attempt to understand the physiology. Last but not least, which is what we are going to end up focusing on more than anything else, is the second blood volume starts to drop. I need you all to immediately start to realize that if a patient's blood volume drops for whatever reason, their blood pressure is going to drop, right? We know this to be true. If the blood volume starts to drop, that blood pressure starts to drop because blood volume and blood pressure are directly proportional to one another. So say, for instance, this patient is going into hypovolemic shock. Or say, for instance, this patient is chronically dehydrated, has polyuria, right? They're peeing so much. They pee so often that urine is stealing volume from the blood. And their blood volume starts to drop. This is indicative of diabetes and a number of other things like hypoalbuminemia. There are quite a few other things that's going to cause a patient to have polyuria. And if that blood volume starts to drop and that blood pressure starts to drop, we call this hypotension. If a patient has chronic decrease in mean arterial blood pressure, they have hypotension. So what is this body going to try to do to fix this problem? That's what we're after here. And we're going to focus primarily on extrinsic controls of this control of hypotension. Right? What do we have? Well, we can really simplify this if we wanted to. We know that as an acute response, we're going to try to do something to cardiac output and to TPR. We're going to try to increase cardiac output, and that should bring that map back up again. And in addition, we're going to try to increase resistance, and that should bring that map up again, because the idea is to try to maintain homeostasis. But in the long term, what else are we going to try to do? Aren't we going to try to fix this blood volume? This body's going to also be trying to bring this blood volume back up again. We don't know exactly what's causing this blood volume decrease in this particular patient. We don't have that information. But this, due to homeostasis, they will also be trying to bring that blood volume back up again. So what variables do we have to control all of this, right? If we want to try to control cardiac output, and we want to try to control TPR, hopefully you guys have already watched my previous video that talks about the nervous system control of cardiac output and TPR, because this is all about baroreceptors. Okay, baroreceptors are going to try to regulate cardiac output and TPR. If the patient's blood pressure starts to drop, less signals go to the CVCC, which is now going to activate the sympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system is going to send more norepinephrine to the autorhythmic cells. It's going to send more norepinephrine to the myocardial cells, activating the beta-1 adrenergic receptors, adenylate cyclase, cyclic AMP, protein kinase A, so forth, so on, to increase both the heart rate and to increase the stroke volume. At the same time, more norepinephrine gets dumped onto those alpha-1 adrenergic receptors, thus increasing the total peripheral resistance as they vasoconstrict. So in this particular video, what I want to try to focus you more on is the regulation over here. Okay, baroreceptors are going to be an immediate, acute response. Whereas sometimes you need a longer-term response. Okay, or you need a combination of both. So let's focus up over on this side of the equation. Let's look at what happens long-term to total peripheral resistance and to blood volume. And the primary way we're going to control this is with hormones in terms of a long-term regulation. All right, let's look at this. And let's look at the hormones that are involved in controlling this. All right, so what I want you guys to remember is that we always have a stimulus, and we always have a response. So if we start to focus in on the stimuli, the stimulus can either be an increase in blood pressure or a decrease in blood pressure. And we're focusing on hypotension here. So we're going to say that the stimulus is a decrease in the mean arterial blood pressure. And so how do we think this body is going to respond? The compensatory response for this is to try to bring that mean arterial blood pressure back up. What hormone do we have to do this job? Okay, the hormone that you guys are going to learn about in this particular video is renin. Okay, renin. And I could almost scream renin to the rafters. You gots to know about renin. Renin, renin, renin. Get that stuck in your head. All right? It is a very, very important part of the control of blood pressure. And every person, you, me, anybody with a disorder, renin is going to be a major factor that is involved in this process. All right, so let's write down below a few things that are going to help us understand this all a little bit better. what is going to happen in this renin response? All right. This renin response is going to require the coordination of a lot of different organs. A lot of different organs. So let's start by writing some of these organs down. Okay, we're going to start with good old liver. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Nobody likes to talk about the liver, but it's so darn important for so many different things. The kidney. Okay, the kidneys are wonderful. They filter our blood. They filter 180 liters of our blood every single day. They have such a high impact on our blood pressure because of that. Oddly enough, another organ we want to talk about is our lungs. Okay, our lungs are going to play a vital role in our blood pressure because they secrete some hormones that are required for regulating our blood pressure. What is this liver doing? All right, so let's start over here with the liver. The liver, if you guys recall, one of the liver's major function is to produce proteins. 90% of all blood proteins are produced by the liver. And one of those blood proteins is called angiotensinogen. Okay, angiotensinogen. And what this is going to do is it's going to be secreted by the liver and it's going to enter our blood plasma. One of the components of our blood plasma all the time is angiotensinogen. And I don't know if I've talked about this in one of my previous videos, I can't remember, but if you have a protein or a chemical that ends in OGN, what this portion of this protein tells you, of this name tells you, is that it is inactive. It is inactive. It is not active. As long as the OGN is on there, angiotensinogen is inactive, and it just floats around in the bloodstream all the time. So what's going to have to happen to it? It's going to need to get activated. What is going to activate angiotensinogen? Well, that's where the kidneys come into play. And the kidneys are fantastic for monitoring low blood pressure. The kidneys are constantly monitoring blood pressure, and the second blood pressure starts to drop, that's going to end up decreasing the function of that kidney. It's going to decrease what's called glomerular filtration rate. And as you start to decrease the glomerular filtration rate, these kidneys are going to panic a little bit because they can't do their job properly. And so they have some cells that monitor this decrease in mean arterial blood pressure. Those cells are called granular cells, but we're going to go ahead and just talk about the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So we just call them JG cells. And these JG cells are going to end up secreting, they synthesize and secrete renin. That's what they do. So as this blood pressure dropped, this is the original stimulus up here, right? As this blood pressure dropped, that's going to cause these juxtaglomerular cells to secrete renin into the bloodstream. And what does renin do? As renin mixes with angiotensinogen, renin cleaves the OGN off of the angiotensinogen. And it's left with a functional, active, semi-active form, but not fully active yet. This is called Ang1. It's not quite ready to do what it needs to do yet. It's one step closer, but we need a lot of fine control over this because what's going to come out of this is going to be so powerful that we don't want the body just to secrete a ton of it. All right, what am I talking about here? I'm talking about Ang2. So Ang1 is going to get converted into Ang2? How? Well, the answer comes back to these lungs. Okay, the lungs actually secrete an enzyme, a protein, right? And this protein goes and lines your blood vessels. Some textbooks try to tell you that it's only in the respiratory system. It's not. This particular protein is called ACE. It's often just referred to as ACE, but technically it's ACE1. Okay, this is going to go line the endothelial tissues through the body, and as Ang1 passes by ACE, it's going to be converted. ACE. What does this stand for? It stands for angiotensin converting enzyme. ACE. Pretty cool, huh? ACE. Awesome. Wonderful. And what does ACE do? As Ang1 passes by ACE, ACE converts angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. And this is where the fireworks happen. All right. Ang2 is a very powerful hormone. And Ang2 is going to have all sorts of downstream effects. And before we start getting into all of the potential effects of Ang2, what I want you guys to do is ask yourself, what do we know Ang2 is going to try to do? Stop. I see students make mistakes on this all the time because they don't think back to the origin of the problem. What triggered this? A decrease in mean arterial blood pressure triggered this. So what do we know the body is going to try to do? If blood pressure drops, the body is going to try to bring that blood pressure back up again, right? So when Ang2 goes down to talk to a whole bunch of different places in the body, hopefully you guys can see that all of these functions are going to do everything they possibly can to bring MAP back up. They want to bring mean arterial blood pressure back up. So let's talk about the different locations that Ang2 has an effect on. Okay, so first and foremost, let's talk about the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, you may or may not know this already, but the hypothalamus is the thirst center of the human body. Okay, it's the thirst center. We're going to go ahead and just write that. And Ang2 activates this thirst center. Okay, it's going to enhance this thirst center by a lot. So what do we know this thirst center is going to try to do? It's going to try to cause people to drink more. And if you drink more, if you increase fluid intake, what's going to start happening to your blood volume? Right? As you drink more, it goes down to the digestive system. The digestive system absorbs that fluid and it adds it to your blood. So now we're going to get an increase in that blood volume. Pretty cool, right? Because what do we know an increase in that blood volume is trying to do? Trying to bring that mean arterial blood pressure back up again. What else is going on in the hypothalamus? Well, it's often easy to forget, but the hypothalamus has nuclei that are important in regulating both the anterior and the posterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus actually can send down action potentials to the posterior pituitary, and that posterior pituitary is going to start to secrete antidiuretic hormone, ADH. Antidiuretic hormone, antidiuretic hormone. The entire function of antidiuretic hormone is to make you pee less. Okay, so where is this antidiuretic hormone going to go and talk to? It's going to go to the kidneys. Okay, this ADH, this guy goes to the kidneys. We're just going to keep that line blue to help us see this a little bit better. And without going into too much detail, because I think that's for another lecture, if you came here looking for the function of ADH in terms of its cellular responses, that's going to have to be in a different video. But ADH is going to cause an upregulation in water retention. It's going to actually cause something called aquaporin 2s to insert themselves into the cell membrane. And those aquaporin 2s allow for water diffusion. All right, so as long as ADH is present, we're going to increase water retention. Where is that water retention occurring? It's occurring in the kidneys, right? So from the kidneys, we retain more water. And if we retain more water, well, crap, what's happening? What happens to our blood volume as more water is retained? We're going to increase that blood volume yet again. Pretty cool, right? We're tying this all together. That's the point here. We're not done with ADH. We'll come back to that. Another organ that Ang2 talks to is the adrenal cortex. If you remember, the adrenal cortex has 3 zones. The first zone is called the zona glomerulosa. And the zona glomerulosa secreted a very important steroid hormone called aldosterone. Aldosterone, again, if you came to learn the exact function of aldosterone on the kidneys, that's for another lecture. Is it important? You better believe it's important. But I think we're just going to have to cover that in another lecture, because aldosterone is going to go down to the kidneys. And in the kidneys, it's going to end up changing the genes. It's going to cause transcription factors in the genes to upregulate, and that's going to cause new proteins to be made. What do those proteins do? Well, those proteins are things like sodium channels and potassium channels and sodium-potassium ATP pumps. And so as aldosterone communicates with the kidneys, what it's going to end up doing is it's going to cause an increase in sodium retention. And I think it's really important, and I think it's actually really negligent if I don't say that at the same time that there's an increase in sodium retention, there is also an increase in potassium excretion. We're going to go ahead and say secretion, but that is going to lead to the same thing. So we're retaining more sodium, but we're getting rid of potassium. And that can come back to cause a lot of hypokalemic issues. If a patient has chronic Ang2, elevated Ang2, then they're going to constantly be secreting potassium, causing hypokalemia in that patient. So I really think it's negligent not to talk about it. But we're going to focus primarily on this sodium retention in terms of its regulation of blood pressure. Because as long as sodium is being retained and we have more ADH, so we have aquaporins, water can follow all of the parties of the blood. The more sodium that's in your blood, the greater the osmotic pressure, which I say, where does water want to be? It wants to be where the party is at. The party is the particles. So the more particles in the blood, the greater the osmotic pressure, which is pulling pressure for water, right? So as we increase that osmotic pressure, this causes water to follow it. And if water is following it, what's going to end up happening to that blood volume? So it's just another way now to increase that blood volume. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. The last place that we're going to look at is our blood vessels. Okay? Blood vessels. Now, we've seen how blood vessels are impacted by alpha-1 adrenergic receptors and beta-2 adrenergic receptors. We've seen that. But what we haven't looked at in any detail is how hormones affect blood vessels. And so what we want to look at here specifically is how does Ang2 affect blood vessels? How does aldosterone affect blood vessels, and how does ADH affect blood vessels? And the answer to all of these is every one of these is a vasoconstrictor. So in the level of the blood vessel, we're going to end up with vasoconstriction. And what does vasoconstriction end up doing? The greater the vasoconstriction, well, what do we know about Pazul's law? Pazul's law says that resistance is proportional to a bunch of stuff, right? 8 times the length times viscosity all over pi r to the 4th. So what do we know about vasoconstriction? It decreases the radius, increases the resistance. And as we increase the resistance of 1 to a million blood vessels, what we're going to end up affecting is the total peripheral resistance. And what just happened to that total peripheral resistance? Boom. We're going to shoot that total peripheral resistance up. Ang2, direct vasoconstrictor. Aldosterone is a vasoconstrictor. ADH is a vasoconstrictor. So all of these together are going to do everything they can to increase that total peripheral resistance. So now, what did we just do? I used the wrong blue, but you guys get the point here. Here, I'll fix that. Ha-ha. Ha-ha. Right, so what did we just do? In the presence of renin, dang you renin, Ang2 is going to end up being activated, which increases TPR, increases blood volume to try to bring mean arterial blood pressure back up. The stimulus was a decrease in mean arterial blood pressure. We want to try to fix that. We want to try to bring that back up. So this increase in blood volume, this increase in TPR, both increase mean arterial blood pressure. And hopefully we regain homeostasis. But if not, that's what pathophysiologies are all about, right? Now, in today's day and age, I would be remiss not to talk about the next step, because it's playing such a huge impact on all of our daily lives right now, summer of 2020. What would happen if we didn't get rid of Ang2? Normally, Ang2 is in the system, and we want it there to try to bring that back up. But once mean arterial blood pressure is fixed, we got to get rid of this thing. Okay, we got to take Ang2, and we have to get rid of it. Otherwise, it stays in the system, and mean arterial blood pressure keeps going up and up and up. Water retention keeps going up and up and up. Total peripheral resistance and hypertension keeps going up and up and up. Biggest part down here is probably this water retention and what I'm about ready to talk about. But we need to take Ang2, we need to get rid of it. In order to get rid of it, we're going to turn it into Ang3. All right, how do we do that? The answer comes back to this lungs again, because the lungs, they have a type 2 alveolar cell. It does all sorts of beautiful things, secretes surfactant and stuff, but it also has what's called an ACE2. And ACE2 and the ACE2 receptor, its job is to take Ang2 and convert it to Ang3. So as long as ACE2 is functional, then ACE2 is able to convert Ang2 to Ang3, and this turns this pathway off. But what happens if we break this ACE2 pathway? What happens if we break it? then Ang2 can no longer be converted to Ang3, and we end up with massive water retention, hypertension, lots of dangerous things, hypokalemia, so forth, so on. And this is what coronavirus does. Coronavirus destroys these type 2s, and more specifically the ACE2 receptor, making it so ACE2 can no longer have a function converting Ang2 to Ang3, and Ang2 starts to build up in the body. And that's why patients with pre-existing conditions like diabetes and obesity, that's why they already have such a danger zone by getting coronaviruses, because they already have a decrease in mean arterial blood pressure chronically due to their disorder, and that's going to impact the amount of Ang2 that their body's already making. And now we can no longer get rid of it, so Ang2 just builds up even more, and it makes them a lot more prone to long-term damage or even death by the coronavirus. All right, so there's a summary of the RAAS system, the Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone system. They don't take into account everything that Ang2 does, because if they did, the name would be like a million miles long, right? So this is RAAS or RAAS. I sure hope it helps. I sure hope that this helps kind of put together. I didn't draw a bunch of beautiful pictures of the hypothalamus and the adrenal cortex. You don't need all that. You just need to be able to understand the basics of it. I didn't write how does vasoconstriction occur. I didn't write how even baroreceptors function, because that's in a different video. So make sure you keep this particular flowchart in context. We are focusing on a decrease in blood pressure causing the release of renin. And there's a bunch of other stuff that we still need to talk about. Cool. That's it for this particular video. In my next video, I will be talking about atrial natriuretic peptide and how its stimulus is an increase in mean arterial blood pressure, and its function is to try to bring that blood pressure back down again. Humankind, be both. See you in the next video. Please like if you like this video and share it with other people that want to learn.